Brad has worked with marginalized people groups for over 20 years. That included in the criminal justice system, as well as Toronto's shelter system, which he's going to talk about today. And that his latest role is actually as a chaplain for Gateway, which he just started recently. But before that, he was the executive director, is that what it was called? Yes, the director of Maximum Hagen, which is one of the largest men's shelters in the city. So he's going to share with us about the shelter system a bit for about 7 minutes, and then we're going to move to our next spot.
Hey all, thank you so much for taking an interest in these issues. And as Angie mentioned, just real quick, very quickly about myself, had three main stops in my career. I worked with both Greg and Angie at a youth drop-in on Yonge Street. Worked with Mennonite Central Committee with guys exiting the criminal justice system, and for the last 6 years, I've been in the shelter system. I started putting this together, and I was like, I'm like, man, the shelter system, it's a little bleak, and there are positives. And so before that, I'd like to say there are people who find their way out of the shelter system, and they should be celebrated and encouraged. And but the shelter system is strange. Greg touched on a number of statistics already. I won't repeat all of those. I'll say simply a couple things though. Just percentages maybe. So 63. Where I got these stats were from the Toronto Street Needs Assessment. So obviously, as soon as you hear City of Toronto, they're the ones doing it. There's good reason to question like those numbers, but it can be a baseline, and it's kind of a starting point. And so in 2021, I didn't even realize it, but apparently they did a street needs assessment in 2021. And at that time, 63% of shelter users were men, 15% were indigenous. So just to put that in perspective, 2.5% of the population is indigenous, and 15% of the homeless population is indigenous. Obviously, those numbers are problematic. And then racialized and LGBT community are overrepresented in the homeless population as well. They did a street needs assessment in 2018, and there was a 26% increase, according to the people who are homeless to 2021. They're going to be starting a street needs assessment in October, so they're starting it all over again. And I'm sure the numbers will be debated and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's important to say that not every shelter is the same. Each shelter, it's not like McDonald's, where if you go to McDonald's, a Big Mac here is a Big Mac there. Shelters are different. Each of them have their own cultures. So I've worked for the Salvation Army. There's a number of shelters that are faith-based. So they take on their own unique qualities and culture. There's city shelters, there's youth shelters, women's shelters, all that kind of thing. So the cultures in shelters can be different. The experience that someone has at Maxwell-Meehan, where you have almost 300 residents, is very different than the experience you might have at Gateway, where you only have 70. If people find their way into a shelter, what is it that they need to heal? How do they need to heal from that? And so I would suggest that there's three things that you need. It's just like any of us, like when we get sick or we have a problem that we face, a lot of times we need sleep, we need nutrition, and we need peace of mind. The nutrition is okay. It's like, as you can imagine, if you're cooking for a wide variety of people, you actually, like if someone likes it spicy and someone likes it bland, you kind of have to keep it in the middle, and it's really hard to get the thing that you like. So the nutrition's okay, but it's not like amazing. It's certainly the quality, all that sort of the things that some of us might take for granted. It's not amazing. The sleep. A lot of times, so just to put it in, a couple things to consider. If you're a 60-year-old man, 65, and you're in a shelter, and the shelter worker is, say, a 28-year-old female, you're kind of being put to bed by people who could very well be your daughter. And so there's a lot of dignity issues around how people enter into the system and how they're treated in it. And I'm not saying I don't know if I'm saying that's good or bad, but there's just those sorts of things to consider about how people are treated while they're there. At Maxwell, you have multiple rooms. I think a lot of people think it's dorm style. It's not. There's a lot of rooms in there, and you could have 4 guys in a room. 3 of them are trying to get a good night's sleep. The other person may have a mental health issue, and literally they can be standing there flicking the lights on and off all night. The staff are kind of overwhelmed. They're not, they may not even hear about the problem until the morning. So when I say sleep, it's a very real thing, because people aren't able to get sometimes, and even if they are in a peaceful room, like when I say peaceful, even if it's a room where everybody's okay, it's still not peaceful. You're still kind of scared. It's not a peaceful environment to be in. So there's the issue of sleep, the issue of nutrition, and the issue of peace, and that's the numbers. And so I'll just real quickly wrap up. One of the things I don't know, are people here educators, people who are teachers? My mom was a teacher. When teachers go on strike, they go on strike for better pay. But there's one, and I've been thinking about this. One of the things they go on strike for is smaller classroom sizes. Because what do they know? They know that if it's a smaller classroom, then the students will get better attention. If the shelters were smaller, and they're moving that way, but if you had smaller shelters, staff wouldn't be as overwhelmed. They would be able to give better attention. Staff sometimes are scared, and they would be. So if you had smaller shelters scattered throughout the city, I think the city tries to do that. It requires political will to do that. People don't want shelters, the whole in their backyard and all that kind of stuff. But if you have smaller shelters, people's experiences would be better. Now, ultimately, I want to make this clear. I think we want a society that has no shelters. And I think one of the things that's happened is emergency shelters started, and no one thought, why is this happening in the first place? And so shelters, again, in my opinion, are like a catch basin for almost everything else that is underfunded. So the healthcare system, long-term care, criminal justice, the shelters catch all of them, and then they're left to kind of deal with that. So there's a lot of systems that need shoring up, that need to be tighter, that need to be fixed. And so, for example, if you had, I suspect, I'm not a numbers guy like Greg, but I suspect that if you put some money into long-term care, for example, you could probably get a lot of folks out of the shelter, especially if they took on a harm reduction perspective and all that sort of stuff. But if you shored up some other things in our society, I think you could get those numbers down. And in the medium to short term, smaller shelters so that people have a more dignified experience, with a long-term goal of getting them out of here. It's not how we want our friends, our community, people to live. One last thing, I'm a chaplain, so I'll just say this. Mother Teresa said, the problems in the world exist because we forget that we belong to one another. And I feel like you can see that every time you pass a shelter or an encampment. It's a reflection that sometimes that we've kind of forgotten that we belong to one another. And some people might say 11,000 people in a city of 3 million. What does that matter? It matters because they're our friends. For those of us who work with them, they're our community. They're a reflection of how we care for one another. And if we can get that right, then we will most definitely be in the process of living in a better city.